He wasn't quite sure which was stranger, the fact that he'd somehow won a seat at the Unity banquet aboard the Aurora's Grace, or the fact that the seat directly beside him belonged to Saris Alley herself, the woman whose beauty was the stuff of whispered legend, painted starlight, and half the known galaxy's dreams. He'd spent the first half-hour glancing sidelong, trying desperately not to look too often and failing spectacularly. Every time he caught the curve of her profile, the graceful sweep of those impossibly long ears that shimmered like polished pearl under the hall's floating light orbs, he forgot how to swallow. His water glass had become an anchor for his hands, gripped so tightly he suspected it might fuse with his skin. The banquet itself was a marvel of absurd excess. Servers floated across the hall on repulsor lift discs, trays bearing gravity-defying dishes that trembled like living art. A live nebula display swirled above the center table, casting shifting hues of violet and silver over the gathered dignitaries. Somewhere in the distance, a choir of synth voices sang in chords that sounded like falling rain on glass. And here he sat, ordinary in every way, wearing a rental suit that smelled faintly of ion detergent and last week's nervous guest. The translator bud in his ear clicked softly, translating the swirl of alien dialects around him into a polite, slightly amused voice. When the servers approached again, he nearly dropped his fork. The dish presented was a floating orb of liquid gold, held together by a thin magnetic field. He watched his neighbor, a dignitary with skin like polished obsidian and 6 jewel-encrusted fingers, pierce the orb expertly. Liquid gold spiraled up into a delicate glass flute. In his attempt to copy the motion, he poked too hard, bursting the orb spectacularly. The golden soup leapt into the air and splashed across his sleeve. He was still dabbing at the mess with a nanocloth when Saris turned to him, her gaze soft, lips curved in something perilously close to amusement. "You're new to these dishes, I see," she said, her voice low and musical, translator matching her tone with near reverence. His face burned so hot he could have powered the emergency lights. You could say that. I'm better with sandwiches. And maybe soup that doesn't hover threateningly." She laughed then, a sound that seemed to ripple through the hall, making even the floating light orbs tremble in sympathy. It wasn't a royal laugh, rehearsed and perfect. It was genuine, edged with surprise, as if she hadn't expected to laugh at all. Encouraged and horribly aware of how ridiculous he must look, he wiped his sleeve, cleared his throat, and said, almost under his breath, "You're beautiful." Time seemed to stutter. The translator stayed silent, but he was sure she'd understood. Her eyes softened, the faintest flush rising along the delicate whorls at the base of her long ears. Then she smiled. Not the polished, diplomatic smile she'd offered to admirers and officials all evening, but a small, private thing. It was the kind of smile that suggested she, too, had been waiting for someone to say something that wasn't laced with titles or trembling awe. "Thank you," she murmured. "It's nice to hear it said simply." He managed a crooked grin. "Well, I'd offer you a sandwich to go with it, but I think security would vaporize me." She laughed again, covering her mouth with slender fingers tipped in silver filigree. The sound was brighter this time, like starlight hitting crystal. They spoke through the rest of the first course. She teased him gently about human dining rituals. "So, you put bread on both sides of the food?" While he confessed his terror of orbital elevators. When the dignitary to her left tried to draw her into a solemn discussion of trade tariffs, she excused herself politely, turning her attention back to him. He learned that her people, the Lyrian, traced ancestry not by bloodline alone but by the melody of the family name, passed down in song. She spoke of home worlds with seas that shone like molten sapphire, of palaces where the walls could remember conversations and recite them back in the voices of ancestors. He told her of rush-hour traffic, of late-night noodle stalls, and of the time he got locked out of his apartment wearing only a bath towel. When dessert arrived, tiny spheres of frozen mist that dissolved on the tongue, he accidentally inhaled one, choking spectacularly. His face turned the color of dying suns, and his cough echoed embarrassingly across the hall. Saris, to her credit, barely managed to contain her laughter, her shoulders shaking under the shimmer of her silken dress. "I think," she teased once he recovered, "you may be the bravest human here, or the most foolish. I've been called both," he wheezed, eyes watering. Usually on the same day. A bell chimed, signaling speeches. Dignitaries rose, holograms dancing over their heads as they spoke of alliances, shared futures, and the great tapestry of peace that bound the galaxy together. The words were grand, soaring right over his head, honestly. Saris listened politely, but every so often her gaze flicked back to him. Once, she mouthed a single word, "Bored," and he nodded, barely stifling a laugh. When the final speech ended, applause rippled through the hall. He clapped too, a beat too late, still reeling from the fact that this most legendary woman had chosen, for a few stolen moments, to treat him like someone worth talking to. As guests began drifting toward the next reception hall, Saris leaned close, the scent of alien spices and starflower perfume catching him off guard. "Will you be at the Arboretum later?" she asked softly. He nodded, words caught somewhere between his chest and throat. "Good," she said, her smile returning. Smaller this time, but no less real. "I'd like to hear more about these sandwiches." And just like that, the galaxy felt a little smaller and infinitely stranger, and far more wonderful than he'd ever dared imagine. The Arboretum of the Aurora's Grace wasn't just a garden. It was an entire drifting biome sealed within transparent alloy walls, orbiting around the ship's core like a slow, living satellite. Strange blossoms from dozens of worlds spiraled in low gravity, anchored to slender stems that seemed far too fragile to hold them. Bioluminescent moss clung to the walls in shifting patterns, spelling ancient Lyrian proverbs before dissolving into spirals of soft green light. He arrived early, hoping to get a moment to breathe and stop his heart from hammering quite so loudly. His reflection in the curved glass dome looked as nervous as he felt. Hair slightly out of place, collar twisted, an expression hovering between panic and wonder. Then Saris arrived, and the Arboretum seemed to shift around her. Not in any magical sense, though with her, who could be sure? But in the way that the drifting flowers seemed to lean just slightly closer, as though they too wanted to hear her speak. She wore a different gown this time, a flowing dark blue that shimmered like deep space, and silver cuffs shaped like curling tendrils wrapped around her long ears. "You came," she said softly, as though it was the most surprising thing in the world. "I figured I'd better," he replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Didn't want you to think humans were all talk and no walk." A small laugh escaped her, as soft as the rustle of the garden's floating petals. "I've been told human legs are quite well suited for walking." "Oh, they're excellent. Except mine sometimes forget what they're doing when I'm nervous." They began to drift along the garden's curved path, guided by slow-moving gravtiles that gently pushed them forward. Around them, pollen motes danced in intricate shapes, programmed by ancient Lyrian botanists to mimic constellations from lost star systems. She asked about his home, so he described late-night noodle stalls under flickering neon signs, stray cats that ruled the rooftops like tiny emperors, and vending machines that could serve hot soup, cold soda, or occasionally electrocute you if you kicked them too hard. "You Earth people live dangerously," she teased. "We do. We also eat things that shouldn't be food. Have you ever heard of something called processed cheese?" She shook her head, eyes wide in mock horror. "Processed? Oh yes, it's like cheese, but built in a lab by scientists who lost their way." She laughed again, covering her mouth briefly. A nearby orchid, sensitive to sound, opened its petals wider at her laughter, revealing glowing filaments that pulsed softly. "Your stories," she said. "They're wonderfully ordinary." "Thank you," he replied, surprised to find he meant it. "I guess that's all I've got, really. Just ordinary things." "They're not ordinary to me," she said, and for a moment her voice grew quieter. "Sometimes I think I'd trade every golden hall I've walked for an evening in one of your noodle shops. And sometimes," he offered, trying for humor to mask the sudden intimacy, "those noodle shops smell like burnt oil and disappointment. Still," she murmured, "they sound free." A soft chime sounded overhead, announcing the garden's water cycle. artificial rain began to drift down. Not in drops, but in perfect, weightless spheres that floated among the blossoms. Saris reached out, touching one gently with a fingertip, sending it spinning off in a lazy spiral. "I suppose you've had hundreds of people tell you how beautiful you are," he said, surprising himself. "Yes," she admitted. "Most of them say it like they're reciting a prayer." "I'm not really the praying type," he said. "But I do mean it." She turned to look at him then, and for a heartbeat, the playful curve of her lips softened into something fragile. "That's why it matters," she whispered. Just as quickly, the moment passed. She flicked a stray water sphere at him. It splashed across his shoulder, sending a small shiver of cold through his shirt. "Oh, it's on," he declared, scooping up another sphere and tossing it gently back. They ended up floating side by side, half laughing, half drenched. The grav tiles kept them steady, but his heart felt like it was spinning somewhere in the void. A pair of insect-sized maintenance drones buzzed past, scanning the droplets for contaminants. He watched them, grateful for something to anchor his gaze. "I hope you know," he said, breathless from laughing, "that you're ruining my reputation." "Oh," she teased. "Yeah, I'm supposed to be mysterious and brooding. But now the whole ship's going to know I lost a water fight to a woman in formal wear. And with longer ears," she added, mock serious. "Yes, that too. Unfair advantage, really?" They resumed walking, though neither spoke for a while. The silence felt companionable, wrapped around them like the gentle hum of the ship's life support systems. "I think," she said at last, "that you see me the way I wish to be seen. And how's that? Just someone, not an idea, not a myth." He thought about that, then said, "Fair warning. I'll probably still trip over my own feet trying to talk to you." "Fair warning," she echoed. "I might still get nervous and say something foolish." "Perfect," he replied. "We'll be nervous together." As they reached the garden's heart, a massive blossom slowly unfurled overhead, petals as broad as sails, revealing a swirling core of pale light. It cast a gentle glow over them, and for the briefest moment, they stood there, just breathing, the galaxy beyond the transparent dome spiraling on. "Will you come tomorrow?" she asked softly. "I'd like to," he said, voice catching on hope. "Then tomorrow," she whispered. As they parted, a drifting pollen mote landed on his shoulder, blinking once before fading to dark. He didn't know what it meant, but it felt like the universe winking at them. Just two souls, adrift in a garden between the stars. News spread across the Aurora's grace faster than a photon ping on the diplomatic network. The most admired woman in the galaxy had been seen laughing, truly laughing, with an awkward human who once nearly drowned himself in floating soup. It wasn't exactly the legacy he'd imagined, but it was a legacy nonetheless. By morning, his personal comm was flashing with a dozen unread requests from journalists, vloggers, and even a galactic cooking show offering to teach him to eat properly for the cameras. He ignored them all, though one automated message did get through. A politely worded memo warning him that the ship's security AI had flagged unusual attention around his quarters. The AI, speaking in a voice that sounded suspiciously like a patient librarian, recommended he avoid reckless gallantry or further aquatic food mishaps. At breakfast, he sat in the corner of the dining hall, eyes buried in a mug of synth coffee that tasted faintly of burnt metal. Across the room, a cluster of diplomats whispered behind elegantly carved masks. He caught the phrase dangerous precedent and something about destabilizing mythic value. He silently wished them a lifetime of soured space milk. His wish was interrupted by Saris slipping into the seat beside him, her long ears adorned today with slender chains of interlinked crystal. They caught the pale morning light, scattering tiny rainbows across the table. "I heard," she said, amusement dancing in her voice, "that you're secretly here to steal the royal heirloom and abscond into a wormhole." "Well," he deadpanned, "it was either that or challenge the entire security team to a water fight, but the wormhole had better food." She laughed softly, leaning closer so her shoulder nearly brushed his. "I'm sorry about the attention. My life seems to do that to people." "I'll survive," he said. I've faced worse. Once ate week-old leftovers and lived. Her smile turned wistful. That might actually be braver. A buzzing overhead drew their gaze to a swarm of floating news drones, their lenses blinking like mechanical fireflies. One drone hovered too close, emitting a gentle hum as it focused on Saris's face. He stood, raising his mug. Sorry, private conversation. The drone chirped in confusion. He shooed it away with exaggerated shooing motions that made Saris stifle laughter behind her hand. It worked briefly. The drone retreated, its tiny propulsion fins twitching in what might have been annoyance. Saris tilted her head, crystal chains swaying. They won't stop, she said. Not as long as you keep being interesting. I could try being boring, he offered. Maybe stand perfectly still and talk only about tax policies. They'd call that enigmatic, she teased. And follow you anyway. Well then, he said. Want to escape? She raised a brow. Where? Maintenance sector. Hardly glamorous, but the drones avoid it because of the magnetic shielding. She hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. Lead the way, mysterious sandwich philosopher. They ducked through corridors lined with humming conduits and flickering status panels. At one point, a trio of engineer bots rumbled past on tank treads, each balancing crates labeled, critical, do not shake. He saluted them solemnly. Saris barely contained her laughter. They found a quiet corner behind a heat exchanger, where the vibration made conversation feel oddly intimate. Pipes overhead dripped condensation into tiny catch basins, and the scent of ozone hung in the air. I used to come here, she confessed, fingertips brushing the bulkhead. When I was a girl traveling on my father's diplomatic tours, the guards couldn't follow me through the tighter conduits. You ran from your guards? He asked, grinning. Only once, she said. Or maybe 27 times. They laughed together, the hum of the exchanger filling the pauses. When the laughter faded, she spoke quietly. Do you ever wish you could disappear? Not forever. Just long enough to breathe. Every day, he admitted. Though disappearing on a ship this size seems tricky. There's a storage hold, she said, her voice light but her gaze searching his. Empty except for unused projection rigs. No cameras. The guards don't bother checking it. You're suggesting royal trespass, he said. Sounds scandalous. Scandalous? She echoed, amusement flickering across her face. But peaceful. They made their way there, pausing only when a passing protocol droid offered them directions with unsettling cheerfulness. The hold was cavernous, lit only by thin lines of emergency lighting. Holographic projectors hung dormant from the ceiling like sleeping bats. They sat on a crate-stamped stage set. Do not drop, shoulders brushing lightly. The silence felt deeper here, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engines. It feels normal, she whispered, to sit like this, to talk, even to do nothing. He risked a glance at her, the galaxy's most beautiful woman, sitting cross-legged on a dusty crate, tracing circles in the condensation with one graceful finger. You know, he said, voice dry, you've ruined my ability to be impressed by fancy banquets. Oh? She asked, tilting her head. Well, he said, they don't come with hidden maintenance lounges and secret conversations. And what about sandwich stories? She teased. Those too, he said, though I've got plenty more if you ever want them. Her smile softened, something unguarded flashing across her face. I would, she whispered. A distant clang echoed through the hold. Maybe a worker bot, maybe the ship settling. But they stayed where they were, shoulders touching, in that tiny corner where status, myth, and history seemed to pause. I think, he said, voice low, you're the bravest person I've met. Why? She asked, brows lifting. Because you dare to be real, even when the galaxy demands you be a legend. She looked away, ears dipping slightly. A Lyrian gesture he'd learned meant vulnerability. Then she met his gaze again, and for a heartbeat, neither spoke. When they finally slipped back into the corridor, the news drones were waiting, but somehow the weight of their gaze felt lighter, the absurdity of it all easier to bear. They walked side by side, sharing small jokes about malfunctioning food dispensers and the time she nearly called a planetary governor by the wrong title. The galaxy outside remained as vast and complicated as ever. But between them, something simple and human had quietly taken root, stubborn as life itself. A warning pulse blinked across his comm band just as he stepped into the corridor. Environmental fluctuation detected. Unexpected temperature drop in adjacent sectors. He glanced up, expecting to see an apologetic maintenance bot rumbling past. But the hall was empty except for the soft swirl of ventilation fog rolling along the floor. He'd barely had time to register the cold seeping into his sleeves when Saris appeared at the end of the corridor, breath curling white in the air. Her dark gown shimmered with frost at the hem, and her long ears glowed faintly, flushed by the sudden chill. "You got the warning too?" he asked, voice rasping in the thin, frigid air. "I did," she said, hugging her arms close. "I'm beginning to think your talent for disaster is contagious." "Could be," he admitted. "But I promise I didn't sabotage the climate controls. My skill set stops at setting off fire alarms with burnt toast." A thin laugh escaped her, fogging between them before fading. Another pulse buzzed on his comm, the words flickering. "Emergency system reset in progress. Seek shelter." "This way," she urged, tugging at his sleeve. "There's a maintenance observatory near the ship's dorsal spine. It holds residual heat longer." They hurried along corridors rimmed with frost so thin it crackled underfoot. Overhead, the normally smooth lighting panels flickered between dim gold and cold blue. His breath felt sharp in his lungs, but Saris kept moving, steps light despite the ice dusting the floor. They pushed through a narrow hatch, and warmth spilled over them like a sigh. The observatory was small, its curved walls transparent alloy showing a dizzying view of the galaxy. Stars tumbling across a backdrop of swirling nebulae. The main generator's heat ran beneath the floor, leaving a narrow strip of warm plating that they shuffled onto gratefully. "I knew you had a plan," he said, exhaling heavily. "Remind me never to doubt royalty." "Technically, this is closer to trespassing than planning," she replied, voice edged with dry humor. "But it works." He glanced at her, noticing how her ears had flushed with color again, the shimmering filigree of her cuffs catching starlight. "Are they very sensitive to the cold?" he asked, nodding at them. "They are," she admitted. "An unfortunate trait in a family that loves ceremony halls chilled for dramatic effect." "I'd offer you my jacket," he said, "but you'd end up wearing what amounts to a slightly damp rag." She smiled faintly, stepping closer to the warmth of the floor. "I'd accept it anyway. It would be impolite not to." He slipped it off, draping it over her shoulders. The sleeves hung awkwardly, and the collar was too wide, but she settled it around her anyway, breathing in the faint, unremarkable human scent. "You smell like ozone and coffee," she teased gently. "High praise," he said. "Usually I just smell like panic and cheap soap." She laughed, leaning back against the transparent wall, eyes turned to the stars beyond. "You know," she murmured, "it's strange. I've stood in 100 such observatories, and it always felt lonely. And now, less lonely," she said, voice barely above a whisper. They stood together in silence, the view beyond them a slow dance of light. He found himself pointing out constellations he barely remembered from childhood star maps. Lines of imaginary heroes and ancient myths sketched across the dark. "That one there," he said, squinting, "looks like a cat caught in a door. A heroic creature," she intoned solemnly, "honored for its sacrifice. And that cluster over there," he continued, "is the Great Sandwich, named after the brave inventor who first put 2 slices of bread around mystery meat and called it lunch." She chuckled, shaking her head so the chains on her ears swayed. "The humans' contributions to galactic culture truly are unparalleled." "Not to brag," he said, "but we also have instant noodles. And you say this with pride?" "Oh, absolutely. They're terrible and perfect at the same time." The humor warmed the chill between them, melting the thin crust of fear left by the ship's malfunction. Outside, the stars wheeled on, uncaring. Then her voice dropped, more serious. This incident, it may not have been an accident. His chest tightened. You mean someone wanted to hurt you? Or scare me? She said. Perhaps scare both of us. A rumor already circles. That I'm distracted. That I've forgotten my duty. He met her gaze, searching for the truth behind her calm. Have you? He asked softly. She hesitated, long ears dipping slightly. I haven't forgotten, she said. But for the first time I question what my duty really is. I don't know much about duty, he admitted. But I do know you deserve to be more than a symbol. She looked away, blinking against something that might have been mist or unshed tears. Symbols don't get cold, she whispered. Symbols don't laugh at sandwich jokes. And symbols definitely don't look good in stolen jackets, he added, forcing a grin that coaxed a small, genuine laugh. She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against his hand. Thank you, she murmured, for reminding me I'm still real. I'd offer to pinch you, he teased, but I'm afraid your guards would vaporize me. They might, she agreed, voice lighter now, and it would be terribly inconvenient to explain. The comm on his wrist chirped again. System restoration complete. Temperature normalizing. Slowly, the cold in the corridor outside faded. They stayed a few moments longer, just watching the slow spin of the galaxy. Come, she said finally, straightening. They'll come looking for us soon. Let them, he replied. We've got a good excuse. Environmental crisis, heroic jacket loan. And 2 witnesses to each other's bravery, she finished, smile returning. They stepped back into the corridor, warmth returning in measured pulses through the ship's plating. The threat hadn't vanished, but it felt smaller now, softened by humor, shared silence, and a jacket that no longer quite smelled only of him, but faintly of starflower perfume. They walked side by side, and even as the ship's guards and news drones turned toward them, it felt, if only for a little while, as if the universe had bent just enough to make room for something tender and defiantly real. The convergence banquet glittered under a living dome of glass, each pane alive with shifting images of the spiral galaxy beyond. Dignitaries in robes laced with stardust took their places, guarded by silent drones hovering like wary hawks. At the center table, under the unblinking gaze of thousands, Saris sat poised, the weight of generations balanced on the graceful curve of her long ears. He stood at the edge of the hall, half hidden behind a pillar etched with ancient Lyrian script that shimmered faintly when touched by the passing light. His suit, borrowed once more from the ship's quartermaster, had been hastily pressed. It still smelled faintly of anti-static spray and old starch. His heart pounded like a wild drum. An envoy's voice droned on about the galaxy's fragile unity and the historic role of Saris's family. He heard only fragments, lost in the blur of hope and fear. She looked composed, serene, but every so often her gaze flickered across the hall, seeking him. Each glance felt like an invisible thread binding them across the crowd. A holographic sigil rotated in the air before her, the ceremonial sign of her assent to an ancient alliance that would bind her to someone else, in duty if not in heart. The crowd held its breath. He shifted, almost stepped forward, but caught himself. This wasn't his place, and he knew it. And yet something in him rebelled, a stubborn spark refusing to fade. Saris's hand hovered over the sigil. Her fingers trembled once, almost imperceptibly, then stilled. Slowly, she drew her hand back. A hush rippled through the hall, followed by the sharp intake of breath from diplomats, advisors, and guards alike. She rose, the silver cuffs on her ears catching the dome's shifting light. I cannot offer my heart where it has already chosen, she said, voice steady despite the silence crashing down around her. The crowd erupted, some in outrage, some in confusion. The holographic sigil flickered uncertainly before dissolving into starlight. For a moment he forgot how to breathe. The weight of it pressed into his chest until he felt dizzy. Then she turned fully, her eyes finding him across the distance. A guard moved as if to stop her, but she stepped past him, gown whispering against the polished floor. Her path cut through the noise, dignitaries parting like drifting nebulae before a comet's passage. She stopped before him, close enough that he could see the faint tremor in her shoulders. "You once asked if I'd forgotten my duty," she murmured, voice low enough only he could hear. "But duty without choice is only a cage." "I didn't want to be the reason you broke tradition," he whispered back. "Then let me be the reason we made a new one," she replied. Behind them, the hall buzzed like a disturbed hive, but her gaze never left his. He realized then how far they had come. From hesitant words over floating soup to this impossible, terrifying defiance. "May I?" she asked, and before he could answer, she took his hand in hers. The galaxy shimmered above them, 1,000 stars reflected in her eyes. A dignitary shouted something about protocol. Another raised a ceremonial staff in warning. Saris only tightened her grip. "Do you trust me?" she whispered. "With everything," he said, his voice breaking a little. "Then walk with me." They stepped forward together, past stunned envoys and twitching security drones. His heart raced, but humor surfaced anyway. "We're about to make a lot of history professors very angry. Let them write their angry books," she said, lips twitching into a smile. "At least they'll spell our names right." The ceremonial AI, programmed for perfect solemnity, faltered in its speech, voice stuttering like a skipping disc. A few dignitaries protested, but others watched in silent wonder. In that moment, the hall felt less like a cage of tradition and more like the heart of something being born. As they reached the center dais, the holographic dome overhead shimmered. The galaxy seemed to pulse brighter, as though the ship itself recognized a choice made freely. His hand in hers felt warm, real, and utterly improbable. Afterward, in the quieter hours, they sat together on a balcony open to the stars. She slipped off the silver cuffs from her ears, setting them gently beside her. "Symbols have weight," she said softly, "but sometimes it's right to set them down." He watched the distant suns reflect in the curve of her ears, still graceful, still unmistakably hers. "You're still Saris," he said, "with or without them. And you," she teased, leaning into him, "are still terrible at soup." They laughed together, relief and fear and wonder all tangled up. Somewhere behind them, new alliances would be debated, old ones rewritten. The galaxy would spin on indifferent and eternal. But here, on this small balcony on a drifting ship of glass and metal, something had shifted. She was no longer the most beautiful woman in the universe only because others said so. She was beautiful because she had chosen to be seen, and to see in return. He realized then how far he had come too. From a man afraid to speak, to one who had dared to matter to someone beyond every myth. The galaxy remained impossibly vast, but for the first time it felt smaller. Not because it had changed, but because he had. As the stars wheeled overhead, they stayed like that. Two souls adrift in cosmic seas, tethered not by duty or legend, but by words whispered honestly, laughter shared freely, and the simple, stubborn hope that even in a universe of ancient certainties, something new could still begin.
Jace Marin had survived orbital re-entry with one wing offline, a Venusian interrogation involving scented neural gas, and a 3-month internship in the Department of Interstellar Sanitation. None of that prepared him for the moment when an alien woman proposed marriage in the middle of a diplomatic brunch. He was halfway through a crumbly protein scone, nodding at some nonsense Admiral Takashi was spouting about mining rights near the Erethian borders, when a Lara Ven leaned forward across the chrome conference table and said quite plainly, "I am initiating the proposal protocol. Will you consent to formal soul bonding under Clause 47B? Jace blinked. "I'm sorry, did you say soul bonding? Is that a metaphor, or? "I would like to marry you, Corporal Marin," she clarified, her voice musical and serene, like a harp played by someone who had never met shame. Clause 47B covers permanent biocognitive interlinking, shared property rights, and optional reproductive negotiations. Takashi dropped his scone. Someone near the back of the room actually gasped, which was impressive considering most of them had undergone oxygen-efficient lung optimization. Jace coughed, choking slightly on compressed blueberry powder. "That's very flattering," he said, clearing his throat with all the poise of a man trying not to die in front of an alien princess. "But I think there's been some kind of cultural misunderstanding. I'm a communications officer, not a, what do you call it, betrothal candidate." "No misunderstanding," she said, ears twitching. "You handled the incident on Titan with wit and compassion. You saved that orphaned synthetic bird during the storm. You once told me my ears looked unreasonably majestic. These actions constitute sufficient courtship according to Erethian standards." "Unreasonably majestic," he muttered, glancing around the table like a man begging for help from a room full of stunned fish. "It was in a memo," she added. "You sent it to Commander Roussel when requesting visual access to my species' audio receptors for translation algorithms. You included a parenthetical compliment." He put his head in his hands. "That was sarcasm. We do not process sarcasm." "Oh, of course you don't. Your rejection, if you choose to give one," she continued evenly, "must be delivered formally and in front of a minimum of 12 witnesses. To reject the proposal protocol in private is considered cowardly and may result in poetic haunting." Jace lifted his head. "Poetic what now?" "Haunting, it's mostly symbolic, occasionally metaphysical. Involves metaphors about loneliness delivered during REM cycles. I'm going to be haunted by rhyming dreams if I don't marry you?" "Correct. I need a drink." The rest of the delegation had fallen into a stunned silence, which was a miracle given that most of them were genetically modified to talk during both inhalation and exhalation. Admiral Takashi gave Jace the look of a man who both feared and admired what was happening. Alara simply waited, perfectly still, as if this sort of thing happened all the time. And maybe it did. Maybe in the star-flung courts of the Erethians, proposals dropped like meteor showers, and no one had ever taught them the joy of a slow burn. Jace had dated women who'd taken 6 months just to hold hands. This one wanted to connect brainstems and share insurance policies. "I don't think this is wise," he said at last, trying to inject diplomacy into his voice. "Marrying me would be impossible." She tilted her head. "Then let's do the impossible." Jace felt something shift. It wasn't the gravity, though Lunar Station Echo 9 was notorious for micro-tremors near the kitchen wing, but something else. Something in the air between them. She wasn't joking. She wasn't threatening. She was just certain. He cleared his throat. "I should probably discuss this with human resources. I have already submitted the relevant forms." "Of course you have." 2 hours later, Jace sat in the lunar cafeteria, staring into a nutrient shake that tasted faintly of regret. The room buzzed with subdued energy. News of the incident had spread fast, as gossip tends to do when it involves interspecies matrimony and a guy who once got rejected by a vending machine. Commander Roussel sat down across from him, holding a tray of suspiciously jiggling food cubes. "So," she said, "heard you got proposed to. Can we not?" "She's a catch, Marin. Those ears alone could get you an ambassadorial pension." "I don't want to marry anyone with ears that majestic. That's too much pressure. What if I say something dumb and they wiggle with disappointment? She's hot, she's smart, and she doesn't laugh at your jokes out of pity. That's at least 3 points above your usual type." Jace rubbed his face. "This isn't about attraction. It's about diplomacy. She's the face of a species that has quantum-level social etiquette. If I mess this up, we'll be lucky if they still sell us neutron batteries." Roussel sipped her synth coffee. "You really think she's doing this for politics?" "I don't know. Maybe I'm just a curiosity. Or maybe this is how they prank people. I mean, she quoted my sarcasm back at me like it was scripture." "Could be worse," Roussel said. "Could have been a mating duel. You don't look good in ceremonial armor. I don't look good in anything that involves public rejection and psychic metaphors." Just then, Alara entered the room. Conversation stopped again. She wore a navy blue diplomatic robe, her ears tucked neatly into a ceremonial headband. She walked straight to Jace, nodded at Roussel, then addressed him calmly. "I understand you are experiencing emotional turbulence." He looked up wearily. "That's one way to put it. Erethian philosophy encourages shared turbulence. May I join you in bewilderment?" He blinked. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Excellent. I will begin co-bewildering. She sat beside him. Roussel gave them both a long look and excused herself, muttering something about love being a weaponized virus. Jace tried not to stare at Alara's profile, the way her skin caught the overhead lights like a pale lavender moon, the curve of her ears shifting subtly as she listened. She was smiling, not smugly, not in triumph, but in quiet amusement. "This isn't how things work where I'm from," he said finally. "I know," she said. "That is why I proposed. You fear impossibility. I find it exhilarating. I don't even know what I'd be agreeing to." "Then we will learn. Together." He looked at her. Really looked. Past the years and the politics and the gravity of it all. And he thought, maybe the impossible wasn't such a bad place to start. 2 weeks after the proposal protocol incident, as it was now referred to in both human and Erethian diplomatic logs, Jace Marin stood in front of his quarters on Mars Station Xylon, armed with a mop, a coffee the color of legal gray, and a carefully rehearsed internal speech about emotional boundaries. None of which prepared him for the moment his door slid open and revealed Alara Venn, sitting cross-legged on his bunk like she owned it, which, according to a technicality in the Eresian Union Code, she did. "I have brought snacks," she said, holding up a bag of protein chips labeled Zorgon Fusion. Now with 90% less regret. Jace squinted. "How did you get in here?" "The door accepted my biometric signature." "You're not registered." I smiled at the sensor. "That shouldn't work. Your species builds doors with very low self-esteem." He sighed and tossed the mop into the corner like a soldier abandoning his last line of defense. "I moved here to get some space, ironically." "Yes," she said. "Mars has much space. The dust is magnificent." "That's not what I—" "Never mind. You followed me across the solar system. Do you know how stalkerish that is? I prefer the term persistent emissary with admirable romantic tenacity." He sat down in the one chair not covered in Erethian ceremonial ribbons. "Alara, I need to ask, why are you doing this? I have told you, you are statistically compatible. Also, you speak in riddles that cause enjoyable neurological confusion." "That's just sarcasm. Most people find it irritating. I find it arousing." He choked on his coffee. Alara looked mildly concerned. "Do I need to summon medical attention?" "No," he wheezed. "Just maybe don't use the word arousing while I'm drinking anything ever again." "Noted." She popped a chip into her mouth and crunched loudly. "Also, your Earth love songs are terrible but strangely effective. I have created a playlist." He closed his eyes. "Oh no. It includes something called Total Eclipse of the Heart, which I believe is a warning about orbital instability. That's not... Okay, you know what? Fine. Why exactly are you here?" She grew uncharacteristically serious. "Because my people believe this is wrong. Because your people believe this is ridiculous. And because when I told you we could do the impossible, you didn't laugh. You just looked scared. That means there is hope. I also looked scared when I saw a space roach in the lunar showers. Yes, but you did not try to marry it." He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. The truth was, part of him had expected her to forget, to vanish into Erethian protocol, write off her boldness as a cultural hiccup. Instead, she was here, with snacks, and a terrible playlist, and eyes that somehow made Mars feel warmer. By the end of the week, their presence on Station Xylon was no longer considered odd. It was considered entertainment. "You two are like a sitcom," said Lieutenant Bacco, the station's head of hydroponics, as he passed them in the corridor. "A deeply confusing interspecies sitcom." Jace rolled his eyes. "We're not a show." "You're literally being filmed," Bacco said, pointing to the diplomatic drones hovering discreetly near the ceiling. Jace looked up. "Oh, for the love of gravity." Alara waved at the drone. "Hello, please capture my left side. It's more photogenic." The drone beeped affirmatively. They couldn't go anywhere without attention. Alara, with her flowing robes and philosophical sound bites, had become a sensation. Jace, meanwhile, found himself branded the accidental groom by the Galactic Daily Stream. There were memes. There was a hashtag. Someone had turned their initial argument into a synthwave remix that played in the Martian nightclubs. "Do you like this?" he asked her over a shared nutrient bowl one evening. "I like that you squint when confused and pretend it is due to ambient light." "I don't squint." "Okay, yeah, I do. But this is a circus. Your metaphor implies chaos. I see only adaptation and affection." He stared into the nutrient paste. "I should be filing reports, attending comms briefings, not figuring out how to say no without causing an interplanetary incident." "You have already said no, but your eyes have not." He looked at her. "That's unfair." "It is accurate." He tossed his spoon down and stood. "Fine, let's settle this. One date, just one. Not an Arethian ritual, not a political statement, just a human-style, low-pressure, entirely ill-advised date. If it goes terribly, you go back to diplomatic duties and I go back to pretending this never happened." Alara's ears twitched in what he had learned was her version of a grin. "Agreed. What is the customary human location for such an engagement?" "Someplace with lighting dim enough to hide regret." The Martian station had exactly one restaurant, creatively named EAT, Ecosystem Approved Taste. It served food cubes in romantic arrangements and played soft ambient music designed to stimulate non-aggressive hormonal spikes. They sat across from each other in a booth shaped like a clamshell. Jace wore his best shirt, which wasn't saying much, and Alara wore something that shimmered like melted starlight. The entire room paused to gawk, then awkwardly pretended not to. "This is weird," Jace said. "Yes," she replied. "I enjoy it." They ordered. The server, a nervous intern in a hover apron, took their order with the reverence usually reserved for royalty or minor demigods. Jace tried not to look at the hidden cameras. Alara tried to understand why Terran appetizers required bread. "Tell me something illogical," she said between bites of what might have been tofu. "My uncle once married a hologram," she blinked. "For companionship?" "Number tax purposes." She considered this. "That is very human." They ate in silence for a bit. The music shifted into something vaguely resembling jazz, but with more synthetic wobbling. "Do you actually think this could work?" he asked suddenly. Alara tilted her head. "Define this." "Us. Marriage. You giving up your whole life for whatever I am." She reached across the table, took his hand, casually like she'd done it 1,000 times in other timelines. "I am not giving up my life. I am choosing a path within it. You are strange, illogical, emotionally evasive, and prone to metaphors involving food. I don't do that. You once described your childhood trauma as overcooked spaghetti logic." He looked away. "Okay, maybe I do." She smiled. "You are not safe. You are not expected. That is why I choose you." He stared at her. The room, the music, the gawking, all of it faded. Just her hand, warm in his. Just that impossible sentence. And for a moment, Jace Marin, cynical, sarcastic, and perpetually overwhelmed, thought maybe, just maybe, the impossible didn't feel quite so far away. Jace was holding a form titled Declaration of Multi-Species Intent to Cohabit when he realized he made a terrible mistake. "You said it would be one date," he hissed at Alara as the Martian administrative officer beamed at them like a proud parent and handed over a stack of glowing paperwork. "One date, not whatever bureaucratic hell this is." She smiled with practiced innocence. "You said if it went terribly, we would part ways." "But it did not go terribly. You smiled 4 times. Once with both eyes. That's called blinking." "False. I recorded your facial muscle tension. There was emotional warmth." I checked. He glanced at the form again. It asked if he had any experience with telepathic link surges, genetic drift exposure, or if he had ever been legally bound to a photosynthetic organism. "What happens if I just don't sign?" The officer behind the desk leaned in helpfully. "Then your application gets flagged as emotionally negligent under Arethian intercultural reciprocity protocols. It might trigger a sympathy audit." "I don't know what that is," Jace muttered. "Neither do we," said the officer. "But the last guy who refused was haunted by approval holograms for 6 months." I'll just hold on to this, Jace said, backing away slowly. Maybe use it as a placemat. Alara followed him out of the admin wing, her robes flowing with just enough sass to make him nervous. You ambushed me, he said once they were clear of listening devices and auto-notary drones. I optimized our legal efficiency. You used a date to trick me into paperwork. I brought dessert. That's not a defense. It was chocolate. Okay, fine. Partial defense. They ended up in the station's rec dome, a large artificial park filled with imported moss, a badly maintained lake, and synthetic birds that chirped in 12-hour loops. Jace paced while Alara sat cross-legged on a floating meditation pad, looking for all the world like a goddess trying to figure out Earth taxes. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, hands shoved deep into his pockets. This whole love thing? Commitment? Galactic attention? I'm more of a suffer quietly and make jokes kind of guy. That is acceptable. He stopped pacing. It is. Yes, but I will not allow you to suffer alone. That's weirdly sweet. It is scientifically sweet. I had your psychological profile reviewed by an empathy simulator. It registered high on the grumpy but loyal axis. You ran my psyche through an AI? Yes, it tried to flirt with me. I deleted it. He laughed, genuinely, for the first time all day. Great. Even the I can't resist you. That is not my fault. My ears are symmetrical. Jace sat beside her, the meditation pad adjusting under his weight with a judgmental hum. What happens if we go through with this? Alara was quiet for a moment. I will likely be disavowed by my family. My status on the Erethian High Assembly would be revoked. Your own government will likely conduct several awkward investigations into your motives, sanity, and libido. Libido? It was mentioned in the Cultural Assessment Survey. He groaned. Of course it was. But, she said, turning toward him, we would be a precedent, a test case, proof that something more than alliance treaties can exist between our species. Something irrational, something human. He looked at her, not at the politics or the risk, or the cameras that still occasionally buzz by pretending to be bees. Just her. That impossible certainty in her voice, that irritatingly beautiful confidence, and yes, the ears. I'm not sure if I can be that guy, he said. You already are, she replied. Later that night, Jace found himself back in his quarters, trying to fill out one of the simpler forms. Preliminary Compatibility Declaration Addendum, Form 19B, which asks things like, do you consent to non-invasive memory echo scans? And are you comfortable with being telepathically witnessed during arguments? He sighed and opened a private channel to Earth. His screen buzzed, then revealed the face of Dr. Kellen Sipes, a friend from his academy days and now a therapist specializing in quantum entanglement of the emotional kind. I need your brain, Jace said without preamble. You always do, Kellen replied, sipping something suspiciously green. Let me guess. Alien girl still wants to marry you. Public interest has reached chaos levels. And now you're wondering if you're having a midlife crisis 10 years early. Midlife crisis doesn't usually involve forms written in 6 languages, one of which vibrates. Fair. So you thinking of going through with it? I don't know. She's amazing. Terrifyingly amazing. She believes in something I don't even know how to name. Love? I was going to say impossible nonsense, but sure. Kellen leaned forward. Here's the thing. You've always been the guy who jokes about feelings instead of having them. And now for once, you're not running? That's not a crisis, Jace. That's growth. Ugh, gross. You'll survive. Maybe even be happy. Just don't fill out any vibrating forms without reading the fine print. 3 days later, Jace stood in a conference room lit like an interstellar spa, surrounded by officials from both worlds. The Unity Council had summoned them to conduct a voluntary yet heavily pressured interview to determine whether their relationship could serve as a model. Alara sat beside him, radiating composure. Jace was sweating through his undershirt. State your reasons for pursuing interspecies union, said the human delegate. Existential dare, Jace replied before Alara could open her mouth. Also, ears. Laughter. Even the Erethian observers twitched politely. Are you aware of the potential risks? I am. She listed them alphabetically over breakfast. Do you believe your bond is genuine? Jace looked at her. It scares me how much I believe that. Alara, for once, looked almost surprised. After a long pause, the chairperson nodded. Pending final review, we are willing to allow a conditional trial partnership with diplomatic safeguards. Alara turned to Jace and whispered, That means yes, he exhaled. Oh, thank gravity. That night, as the Martian sky simulated a twilight it had never earned, Jace and Alara stood on the observatory deck. 1,000 small lights blinked in orbit above them. Ships, satellites, surveillance drones. So, Jace said, we're officially, unofficially almost married. Progress, she replied. We should celebrate. I brought ice cream, she said, producing a tube labeled Cryo Choco 42. He laughed. You keep doing that? What? Making the impossible look easy. She handed him a spoon. Then help me make it permanent. The wedding planning began with a mistake and escalated into a diplomatic emergency by lunchtime. I said I wanted a small ceremony, Jace repeated, staring at the rapidly growing list of attendees projected across his retinal HUD. This list includes 4 planetary governors, a sentient fog, and something called the Minister of Universal Subtlety. Alara nodded, adjusting her ceremonial sleeve with practiced calm. He insists on attending, though he will likely be invisible. They? Of course, Jace rubbed his eyes. The room around him, technically the Mars Station Xylon Multicultural Briefing Theater, unofficially repurposed as Wedding HQ, was filled with a buzz of voices, data packets, and hover notaries. A group of Arethian monks floated in the corner, meditating on the concept of eternal union while playing slow-motion bagpipes. A Terran chef was arguing with a Martian nutrient engineer about cake density regulations. He turned to Alara. You said it would be simple. She gave him that infuriatingly serene look. Simplicity is a cultural construct. This is minimalist by Arethian standards. There's a holographic phoenix warming up backstage. It only ignites if the vows are sincere. Jace blinked. That might actually be useful. A junior coordinator floated past them on a hover disk, her face a hologram cycling between calm reassurance and mild panic. Excuse me, we're having a mild scheduling overlap between the vow procession and the cosmic unity drum circle. Also, the Venusian ambassador is allergic to starlight orchids, and the flower drones are ignoring allergy tags. Alara raised a hand. The coordinator stopped mid-glide. Reroute the orchids to the ornamental void trees. Move the drum circle to the 0G mezzanine. Tell the ambassador we will provide photosensitive pollen dampeners. The coordinator blinked in gratitude and zipped away. Jace stared at her. You know you're terrifying, right? I know I am efficient. Same thing. By the next morning, the chaos had acquired sentience. The event had been picked up by every major galactic stream. A panel of experts had been assembled on the Saturnian news beacon to argue over the implications of their union. One commentator described it as a touching symbol of post-biological empathy, while another declared it the beginning of the interstellar emotional apocalypse. Jace tried to ignore it. He focused on writing his vows and failing. He wrote a heartfelt paragraph that sounded like an apology letter. Then he rewrote it into a series of metaphors involving oxygen scarcity, which made him sound vaguely threatening. Finally, he settled on a simple truth. I'm still scared, but I think the fear means something matters, and nothing's ever mattered more than this. It wasn't poetic, but it was real. He looked over at Alara, who was fine-tuning her vow delivery system, a micro-neural transmitter that would project her words directly into the audience's emotional centers. She caught his gaze and said, I considered composing a sonnet using Arethian harmonic syntax, but I chose a memory instead. Which one? The first time you laughed at something I said without understanding it. That doesn't narrow it down. Precisely. They sat in silence for a while, watching the Martian sun simulate a golden dawn. The air tasted like dry metal and anticipation. Jace cleared his throat. So what happens if something goes wrong? She glanced at him. Define wrong. Oh, I don't know. Maybe your high council storms in, declares the whole thing invalid, and tries to separate us using a dimensional legal loop. That only happened once. I was being hypothetical. She took his hand. If something goes wrong, we will still be us. Maybe inconveniently. possibly illegally, but us. The ceremony began with gravity fluctuations. Technically, they were symbolic gravimetric pulses meant to represent the weight of commitment, but to the unprepared, it felt like standing on a trampoline being judged by ancestors. Jay stood at the center of the orbital chapel, a hollow dome orbiting just above Mars's upper atmosphere, dressed in formal Earth military diplomatic attire that itched and blinked in odd places. Alara wore a dress coated in bioluminescent threads that shimmered with her heart rate. The effect was dazzling, also slightly nauseating. Guests floated in concentric rings, officials, strangers, sentient clouds, and a few old friends. Russell waved at Jace from the second ring, giving him a thumbs up and mouthing "Don't faint." The Efficient, an AI cluster named Unity Prime, began the ceremony in 3 languages and 1 mood tone. It hummed, it sparkled, and at one point it sang an operatic note that caused half the audience to blink out tears reflexively. "Before we begin," Unity Prime intoned, "are there any objections?" A long silence. Then a holographic hand raised from the third ring. Jace groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." The hologram solidified into an Erethian elder, cloaked in spirals of starlight and political authority. "I object," the elder declared. "This union threatens the sanctity of ancestral tradition and contradicts 3,000 cycles of cultural equilibrium." Alara stepped forward. "Elder Varn, you taught me the ethics of harmonious discord. This is discord, but it is also harmony. You would undo centuries of boundary with one act of emotion?" "Yes," she said, "because boundaries are not sacred. Love is." There was a pause. Varn's image flickered. Then with a reluctant nod, he vanished. The crowd exhaled. "Nice rebuttal," Jace whispered. "I rehearsed," Unity Prime resumed. "Then let the bonding proceed." Alara transmitted her memory, a quiet moment on the station, her watching Jace fall asleep over a data pad, his fingers still twitching from a dream. The audience gasped as the emotion swept through them. Affection, curiosity, warmth. Jace followed with his vow, speaking softly without tech. "I'm not perfect. I'm not logical. I don't even know how I ended up here. But every time I try to walk away, I look back, and you're still there, and I still want to try." The phoenix ignited, which meant the vows passed. Cheers erupted. The AI cried binary tears. Someone from Jupiter's moonhive launched celebratory pollen into the 0G. Alara turned to Jace. "Now we're anomalously married." "That sounds about right." And in that strange chaotic orbit above the red dust of Mars, 2 people from different stars chose each other. Not because it made sense, but because it didn't have to. Jace Marin woke up married to an alien. Technically, he woke up to the faint chime of a Martian morning sim cycle and the smell of nutritional soy espresso. But the bigger truth hovered over him like an excited drone. He had married Alara Ven, a Rethian diplomat, cultural anomaly, and certified chaos in ceremonial robes. She sat cross-legged at the foot of their quarters, drinking tea that smelled faintly of citrus and theoretical math. Her ears twitched in rhythm with the environmental controls. "We are officially trending," she said, eyes on a translucent data scroll. "Several systems have declared us emotionally inspiring. Are we still considered legally married, or was that just a very elaborate media stunt?" She turned to him. "There was a brief petition from the Department of Interspecies Rationality to nullify our union, but it was overruled by the Galactic Council of Emotional Authenticity." "That's a thing?" "It is now." Jace sat up slowly. "So this is our life now. Public figures, cultural case study, possibly part of a romantic sitcom. We're being pitched as a holodrama," she said. "Working title, Ear Me Out." He groaned into his hands. "Make it stop." "Too late. There is fan art." They both fell quiet for a moment, the soft hum of Mars Station humming beneath them like a contented beast. Then Jace said, "Are you sure you're okay with all this? The fame, the politics, the relentless Terran sarcasm?" "I am married to the universe's most emotionally repressed human. I find everything else manageable." They smiled at each other. It wasn't the wild cinematic grin of newlyweds in gravity-free bliss. It was smaller, warmer, earned. The months that followed blurred into something stranger than peace. Their union sparked policy debates, spontaneous musical numbers in Erethian universities, and a short-lived cult dedicated to emotion-first diplomacy. Station Xylon became a symbolic epicenter, hosting seminars with titles like Cross-Cultural Affection in the Age of Biosentient Regulation. Jace found himself drafted into lectures, interviews, and once, bizarrely, a holographic cooking competition against a Venusian chef who claimed love required more paprika. He gave up trying to escape the spotlight and instead learned to ride it with minimal existential screaming. "You've become adaptable," she said. "I've become a walking anomaly." Same thing. They bumped gently into a kinetic sculpture of two spirals merging and shared a kiss that accidentally triggered an applause track embedded in the wall. Not everything was simple. There were hard days, moments of miscommunication, cultural weirdness, unexpected allergies. Jace once gave a toast at an Erethian dinner that, due to improper phrasing, was interpreted as a threat against 4 generations of ancestors. Illyra once accidentally connected their neural links during a dream about Terran taxes. Jace screamed for 20 minutes. But they learned. They developed a system, color-coded emotion tags, shared memory vaults with password protection, and a rule about never discussing politics while orbiting Venus. And Jace changed. Not overnight, not in a montage, but slowly, like a planet shifting orbit. He stopped hiding behind jokes. Well, most of the time. He listened more. He asked questions. He started writing again, not reports or declarations, but letters. Long ones, sent into the void. He didn't know who they were for. Maybe no one. Maybe his old self. The one who thought love was dangerous. The one who believed he wasn't built for connection. He ended each letter the same way. Still scared. Still choosing her. 1 year after the wedding, they stood on a stage orbiting Europa. The crowd stretched in every direction. Diplomats, skeptics, artists, small robots holding signs that read, "Let love recode logic." Chase took the mic. It hovered obediently. He cleared his throat. "People keep asking us what it means. This thing we did. This leap across biology and protocol and sanity. They want a thesis, a model, a guidebook." He glanced at Illyra, who gave him the nod that meant, "Just be weird and honest, it works." "I don't have that," he said. "I don't have a neat answer. I don't even have matching socks. But I know this. Every time I wanted to run, she stayed. Every time I got lost in what couldn't be, she made it a little more possible." A pause, a breath. So maybe that's all it is. Not fate, not politics. Just staying, choosing, over and over, even when it doesn't make sense. The silence that followed was soft, grateful, real. Then Illyra stepped up and added, "Also, his cooking has improved." Laughter broke like starlight. Later, as they watched Europa's icy surface shift beneath the clouds, Jace leaned into her and whispered, "Do you regret it?" "No," she said. "Do you?" "I regret not doing it sooner." They held hands, not as a spectacle, not as a symbol, but as two people who had walked through absurdity and come out intact. Maybe not whole, but enough. And somewhere, far away, a new couple, Erethian, Terran, maybe neither, read their story and dared to imagine something impossible. And then they did it anyway.